Yeah, and not just oxygen, but with
Nutrients.
everything. Yeah, they're getting plenty of blood. Because the blood is what's carrying all that good stuff to them. I don't know if this thing is going to want to work or not. I'm not sure what this wire goes to. Okay. Let's see if I can show you what I mean by this. Come back to that. I'll do that in the lab if not. Here's what tissue perfusion is. I want everybody to look at their finger, at the tip of their finger. Okay? And you see it's kind of pink.
Yeah.
Now take your other finger and push on it. Push kind of hard on the end of that finger. And what you're going to notice when you take your finger off is it's pale. Right? You've pushed all the blood out. And normal tissue perfusion took about 3 seconds for me to pink back up there. Probably the same for you. For those of you with darker colored skin, probably not quite as obvious, but it's the same thing. It should take about as long for the capillaries to refill as it takes you to say capillary refill. Ready? Capillary refill. Oh, that's red. Got it? Capillary refill. Perfect. I'm perfusing okay. I've got good blood supply to my finger. That's a good thing. All right. So that's basically a good measurement of tissue perfusion. Now, if you were laying here and you had been in a car accident and you had bled a whole bunch and your heart was starting to fail on you, I can promise you, if I pushed on your finger, it wouldn't pink back up. It might not ever pink back up. You know? Or it might not pink back up until we had resuscitated you, given you a bunch of fluid, given you a bunch of blood, made your heart work stronger, all that stuff. Because the whole secret to your heart, your cardiac system working properly is that you can maintain tissue perfusion throughout your body, right? That's really what this whole thing's about. This heart pump thing here is so that you can send blood and perfuse every cell in your body to make it work right. Okay, so as I've said before, it carries oxygen and nutrients, carries carbon dioxide, which is the waste gas, basically. In goes the good gas, oxygen, out goes the bad gas, carbon dioxide, and other wastes carried away. Tissue perfusion is completely under the control of these three things. Cardiac output, how well is your heart pumping? Are you pumping enough blood? Peripheral resistance. If you have really strong peripheral resistance in your hands, for example, let's say you're out up on Mount Hood and you're in a snowstorm and you don't have any gloves and your hands are really cold, feel cold to you, how much blood do you think you're going to be sending to your hands? Zero. Almost zero. Why? Because every drop of blood you send to your hand is going to get cooled down about 10 degrees. And if that continues for a while, you're going to become cool all over. You're going to become hypothermic. So that's what this says. When it says peripheral resistance, this is what your body does. It can shut down different areas of blood flow. I think another example we've talked about in this class is that if you go out and run a marathon, you need all your blood for your heart, your lungs, and your muscles, right, to run. You're probably not going to be sending any blood to your stomach and your intestines. Why? Because it can wait. It can wait. That food can just sit there in your stomach. That fluid can sit there in your stomach till you finish the race, for that matter. And I've probably said this before too, but there's a reason that there aren't a lot of toilets along the marathon route, because almost nobody makes any urine when they're running a marathon. I've run marathons, and you drink like crazy before it, and you're nervous when you're at the starting line, and oh God, I gotta go pee again. Oh, I gotta go pee again, you know, because you think you're making all this urine. But once you start running, you don't make any more, you know. And if you make it within 6 hours of finishing the race, that's pretty good, because it takes a good while to rehydrate enough and to bring you back. You know, some absorption does occur. Obviously, there are water stops along the marathon route, and people do drink the water. But I can tell you, that's something you really have to train your body to do. And if you haven't trained yourself to drink while you're running, that water is going to sit right there in your stomach. And I've experienced this before myself. It just sits there, and then you get to about the 13-mile mark, and you can hear it. Bloop, 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 bloop. It's completely sitting in your stomach. Why? Because your stomach isn't getting any blood. Your stomach isn't contracting. Your stomach isn't pushing that fluid on down into your duodenum. It's just sitting there. And so about the 13-mile mark, you'll see all these folks over on the side of the road barfing up their water that they've drank at all the water stops because of peripheral resistance. Not sending any blood to those particular areas. All right. How does our body control all these things? Well, we have a bunch of reflexes that control it. We have baroreceptors. Remember what baroreceptors are? Like barometers, right? A barometer measures air pressure. Baroreceptors measure blood pressure in your body and sends signals up to your brain stem, sends signals back to your heart and to your blood vessels to make the changes necessary. We also have chemoreceptors in our carotid body is one of the major places, and in the aorta as well. And they are measuring pH, and they're also measuring the PCO2. It says dissolved gases. We really don't measure oxygen that much, but we do PCO2 and make the changes necessary to fix those things. Everything here is working together. Our blood, our heart, our cardiovascular system, they're all working together to try to make this all work for us and maintain homeostasis. Yeah. American pie. Or apple pie and American flag, right? Homeostasis is wonderful. All right. What happens when we exercise? Let's talk about that for a minute. The first thing that happens if you do some light exercise, you started doing a little, you got on a treadmill and you started walking, you start dilating up, you increase your circulation, your cardiac output goes up, your venous return increases because now you're really pumping that blood because the muscle pumps in your leg are really helping pushing it back. And when you have more blood coming back to the heart, because of the Frank Starling principle, more in, more out. The more blood you have coming back to your heart, the more your heart pumps. So your cardiac output rises. When you get really active and doing heavy exercise, you start, everything gets put into the fight, so to speak. You activate your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight system. Your cardiac output increases up to its maximum, which is normally for most of us is about 4 times what it is at the resting level. In other words, if my cardiac output is 4.5 liters per minute, I can run it up to almost 20 units, liters per minute if I'm really exercising. That's good for you, by the way. That's a real good thing about exercise. I go to the club and work out several times a week, and I see all these guys. That is really impressive. I want to show that to the video. She was eating 2 oranges, and she peeled them perfectly, didn't she?
Twice.
That is amazing. That's amazing. You know, I see all these guys and they're working and they're pumping their arms and they're puffing up and they think they're so big and strong. Let me tell you, there is only one muscle in your body that you really need to exercise if you want to be healthy, and that's this one right here. That's your heart. Because that's the one that's going to determine how long you live. You know, you may be able to have more children and attract more babes if you have big muscles, but it never has worked for me. Have the strong heart. Are you laughing? All right, here we go. Here's an example of how we change our blood distribution around while we're exercising. Look at the top line, our skeletal muscles. If we're just sitting around, our muscles are getting about 1,200 cc's a minute, 1,200 milliliters a minute. If we exercise, it goes up to about 4,500, and if we really exercise, it goes up by a factor of almost 10. About 10 times more blood is going to our muscles at strenuous exercise than at rest. Makes sense. Our heart is working harder, so it's going to need more blood. It's going to need more blood through those coronary arteries, and sure enough, it goes up by about a factor of 3. But here's the point I want you to notice. The brain. The brain gets 750 cc's a minute at rest. It gets 750 cc's at light exercise, and it gets 750 cc's at strenuous exercise. Whoa, what does that tell you?
The brain's important.
The brain is the most important organ in our body. And we will do everything we can to always be sure that our our brain is getting the right amount of blood. Not too much, not too little. But whether we're at rest or whether at strenuous exercise, it's going to get the same amount. Why? Because it's always working, all those little axons are firing and all those little dendrites are receiving those impulses and all that stuff. And that just has to go on all the time if we're going to be conscious, right? Yeah?
It's kind of a tangent. Is it the baroreceptors in what part that monitor that? What part of the brain monitors how much blood pressure there is? Or blood?
Well, the hypothalamus.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where the receptors are, both for temperature and for oxygen. Yeah.
Don't also the blood vessels have barometers?
A couple of the blood vessels that I mentioned before, the aortic body has some blood pressure monitors, but it's measuring for your whole body. It's not just doing your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact is, there's very careful control on this, so these blood vessels going to your brain can either contract or dilate in order to keep the same amount of blood flowing to your brain all the time. Now look at this. Here's your kidneys. I mentioned that before. Normally at rest, we're putting about 1,100 cc's a minute through our kidneys. At serious exercise, we're down to 600. We're not making much urine at this level, like I just mentioned. Same thing with your guts, your abdominal viscera. If you're running and exercising hard, you're not digesting your food. Remember, that's rest and digest. That's so forth. So your total cardiac output, you see, has gone up on this slide here. And these numbers are not to be memorized or anything. They're just to show you the relationships. Total cardiac output, 5,800, pretty normal number. Can triple or quadruple without too much trouble. What happens if you train really good and say you're Lance Armstrong and you've been riding your bike 8 hours a day every single day of the year for 15 years? Think about that. Whereas this guy's heart might weigh 300 grams, Lance's heart is like that big. And when you see a chest x-ray of him, instead of his heart looking like a little ball here in the middle, his heart is like this big. It fills his chest. It's a lot stronger. It's a lot more powerful, and it can not only is it bigger and stronger, it can generate a higher stroke volume, but can also generate higher pressures, and he can run it at a much higher heart rate. So whereas a non-athlete may start out at 83 and maxes out, a trained athlete may only max out at 182. He can actually hold his at 210 for 2 hours. Just think about that. When I when I get on an exercise machine, I'm 67, and when I get on an exercise machine and I get my heart rate, I wear a strap, measures my heart rate. And when I get it up to about, if I hold it about 115, I can go all day, heart rate of 115. If I bump it up to 130, I might as well start a countdown timer, because I'm only going to be able to go about another 8 or 9 minutes, and I'm going to be just totally exhausted. Because we all have what's called our heart rate maximum, our maximum heart rate, and it falls with age. It actually starts at about 210. You can figure out what your maximum heart rate is real quick. Your maximum heart rate is 210 minus your age. So for most of you, that would be about 180. I would die if my heart rate got to 180. I would just be dead. It won't go that fast. It just won't go that fast. Also notice here with this trained athlete, he can pump his blood pressure up a lot higher. The higher you pump the blood pressure, the faster the blood flows through the whole system, right? Look at this cardiac output. 30 liters a minute. That is 6 times normal. Yeah?
How does it work with the heart when you stop exercising, like your skeletal muscle gets
Kind of wastes
smaller,
away.
wastes away?
So does your heart.
So his does.
His will get smaller as he quits exercising.
It'll just be the wall of, the chambers, the amount of volume in them are the same as ours. correct?
No, his chambers get bigger too,
They do.
but his chambers get thicker. The wall muscle gets thicker as well.
So when he stops working out and his wall gets thinner, does the chamber then also get smaller?
Yes, it will. Now, you guys can all check your pulse right now, and your pulse is probably around 70. That's pretty normal for a normal person. His pulse rate is 32 at rest. 32. Whoomp. 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 Ours is going whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. So yeah, those are all matters of training. And it's not just size of the heart and size of the muscle, but it's all the enzyme systems as well. I mean, you know that his glycolysis, not glycolysis, but his glycogenolysis system works faster. He can break glycogen down into sugar a lot faster. Why? Because he's trained it to. Every day when he's out exercising, not only is he exercising his muscles, but he's stressing his enzyme systems to generate more sugar, proteins, and all that stuff that he needs to burn while he's doing that exercise. It's kind of amazing system that we have. Shock is a short-time ability of the heart to try to keep itself going. If you lose more than 20% of your total blood volume, you're going to probably be into shock and stay there until you can get some fluid or have some time passed so you can start pulling fluids in from your interstitial spaces, pushing the blood out of your liver that's been kind of sitting there, pushing the blood out of your bone marrow and so forth. 20% blood loss. How many pints of blood do you have in you? Huh? About 10. About 10 pints of blood, which is about 5 liters, right? Liters are quarts, right? And we use the word pints because that's the way when you donate blood, you donate a pint. When you get a unit of blood from another person, you're getting a pint, or close to it. It's really 500 cc's. Okay. So how do we restore? Let's say we've lost a bunch of blood volume. Where do we get it back from eventually if we have a little time to do it? Well, we're going to start pulling it back in from our interstitial spaces. So if you have any swelling anywhere, the first thing that's going to happen is that swelling is going to get reabsorbed back into your bloodstream and be used to pump around. Aldo and ADH are gonna work on your kidneys so that you don't lose any extra water and you don't lose any extra salt. Your brain is gonna feel thirsty and you're gonna go drink more. Erythropoietin is gonna stimulate your red cell production, start making more red cells. That's gonna take a while. That's not gonna happen in 2 hours. That's gonna happen over a course of a week. But nonetheless, it's important. So here, I'm not going to go over this slide with you because it's too complicated, but it just kind of summarizes the things we were just talking about. So if you lose a bunch of blood, if you are a normal blood vessel and you lose blood, your homeostasis is disturbed, these are the ways that your body will work in order to raise your blood volume and eventually bring you back to normal. So look that slide over, I think it's important. We have, as we've just talked about, we have certain organs that we have kind of separate mechanisms to control blood flow. The brain is one, we talked about it. The heart, you know, if your heart is exercising, you've got to be able to send more blood to your heart. And same with your lungs. And I'll just leave it at that. Blood flow to the brain is our top priority because the brain has a very high oxygen demand and it can't substitute anything. The blood needs sugar and it can't do gluconeogenesis or any of those other bypass systems to make sugar. Your brain just has to have glucose, period. When your peripheral vessels constrict, your cerebral vessels dilate. By that, if you go into shock, even though your body may have a blood pressure of 20, your body's going to do everything it can to keep the blood flow to your brain. So the cerebral vessels are going to open up and dilate more so that what you are pumping will go to your brain. A stroke, definition of a stroke is it's caused by no blood flow to a certain part of your brain. We call them cerebrovascular accidents because most of them are a problem with the blood vessels, which is what we're talking about right now. And the two major types of strokes, one is called caused by a blockage, that's usually caused by a piece of plaque, a piece of cholesterol plaque that had collected, breaking loose, going up to your brain, and blocking off the blood flow. Now, if it blocks off the blood flow to the right middle cerebral artery, you're going to be paralyzed and maybe numb on your left side, right? Because your right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. And from what you learned when you were when we were studying the brain a few months ago, you know which regions are which. So when you see somebody that's had a stroke, you can kind of look at him and say, oh yeah, let's see. He's paralyzed in his right arm. He's probably had a stroke in his motor strip. Remember the motor and sensory strips on either side of the central gyrus back there, the central sulcus. And that's where his stroke was. Now, so that's one kind. That's an ischemic stroke, just caused by a blockage. The more devastating type of stroke is caused by a rupture of one of the arteries. And that's where a little blood vessel may just bust. And when an artery in the brain busts, it's kind of like taking a fire hose and shooting it into Jell-O. Okay? So you've got high pressure blood flowing out of a little bitty artery and it's squirting into the brain tissue, but the brain tissue, you know, in real life is about the consistency of Jell-O, and so it just does terrible, terrible damage. Hopefully it will stop. Sometimes it doesn't. The worst kind of rupture, of course, is a ruptured aneurysm in your brain. You had a big blood vessel that had a big bulge on the side of it, and suddenly one day it broke. Those are almost always fatal pretty quickly. What's a heart attack? A heart attack is the same thing, only in your heart. It's caused by a blockage of the coronary blood flow. There's several levels of it. Angina is chest pain. The thing about angina is that it's reversible. And usually it's just caused by narrowing of the artery. And so if you're exercising or something and it's narrowed, you can get enough blood flow through that narrow spot to keep your heart going as long as you're at rest. But once you start exercising, now your heart needs more blood, and you can't push any more through that little tiny narrow spot, and so you get angina. And folks learn pretty quick, if they're getting chest pain, they need to sit down and rest, or they need to grab their oxygen mask or whatever. But angina is always reversible, and it does not cause long-term damage to the heart. On the other hand, if it's worse than that, it's going to cause some tissue damage. Some of your heart muscle is going to die. Now usually a piece of your heart muscle dies from a heart attack, and you can compensate for that. The other heart muscle will take over for it, and you'll be okay. Although a lot of folks end up having one little tiny heart attack after another, after another, after another. They may not even know they're having heart attacks, but they're having little pieces of their heart muscle die, and that eventually leads to what's called heart failure, where their heart now can't pump enough to keep them going. Can't pump enough to make urine, it can't pump enough to make them think right, it can't pump enough to send blood to their toes, and they end up losing toes and get amputated toes and all that kind of stuff. So, and then the last one down there is death. Obviously a heart attack can cause death. Just as an aside, most of the time when people die of a heart attack, they do not die of tissue damage. They don't die because they had a, quote, massive heart attack. Because a massive heart attack would indicate that they're not getting any blood to lots of their heart. It doesn't really work that way. Most people who die from heart attacks have had a little tiny heart attack, but that little tiny heart attack then sends out all of these pacemaker signals, and the heart goes into a funky rhythm that doesn't go down through the normal system of transmission to the heart. And so this piece of the heart starts squeezing, and this piece starts, and this piece starts, and this piece. It's called cardiac fibrillation, and the heart doesn't pump any blood when it's doing that. And so that's what they die of. Most heart attacks are caused by abnormal heart rhythms. That's why EMTs, EKGs, these things. I think we have one out here in the hall. If I ever collapse, guys, go out and get it. Give me a shock to try to get you going again. This is kind of an interesting thing, and just close your eyes for a minute and think about this. If we have oxygen and we're taking a deep breath, okay, and we send a lot of oxygen to this particular, say our left upper lobe, it's getting a lot of oxygen because we breathed and all the alveoli up there are open and so forth, then you would think it would be nice if you sent more blood to that area, right? Because it can pick up oxygen, carry it out to your body. And indeed, that's what's happened. That's what happens. On the other hand, let's say you had pneumonia in your right lower lobe down here, and you take a deep breath, and almost no air goes to your right lower lobe because it's full of pus and mucus and stuff. So, do you still want to send a lot of blood to that part of your lung? No. So, when you have low oxygen content in your lung, and this is the only place, the vessels constrict. Now, that's exactly the opposite of everything else in your body. Because if you have an injury to your finger, let's say you have an infection in your finger, okay, and you need, it needs more oxygen, right? It needs more blood, so you dilate to the areas that have a problem. And you send more blood there, that's why your finger gets red, that's why it throbs, you know, color, dolor, all that inflammation stuff. It's just the opposite in the lung. For really obvious reasons if you think about it. Okay? Pulmonary circuit, I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this. First chapter in 233 is on the respiratory system. But, you know, here's all the blood coming back to the right ventricle, or right atrium, goes to the right ventricle. Then it goes out through the pulmonary arteries, right and the left. Here's the right pulmonary artery. Here's the left pulmonary artery. Remember, even though they're arteries, they're blue, because the blood is all unoxygenated, going to the lungs, and then it percolates through the lungs, and it comes back through the pulmonary veins, which are bright red, coming back. And the way these things, it's a very simple process, actually. We breathe in, we fill all these little alveoli, these little cavities in our lung up with oxygen, and around every one of those alveoli is a bunch of little tiny capillaries that kind of encircle these alveoli. And as the blood flows past there, and we're talking 3 seconds, as the blood passes through here, the carbon dioxide is offloaded into the lung, the oxygen is absorbed so that then you can blow the carbon dioxide off when you expire, and the air you just breathed in has oxygen that your body is taking in. So that's kind of the way it works. We'll go into much more detail. The systemic circuit all the time contains about 84% of the blood volume. The only thing that's not in the systemic circuit, in other words, the left side of the heart's circulation, is in the lungs, and there's only about 16% of your blood at any one time that's in the pulmonary circuit. Although it all goes through one or the other, every minute and a half. Every drop of blood that you pump not only goes through the right side of your heart and gets oxygen, but then it goes out through the left side of your heart to nourish the body. So here's all the arteries you need to know. It looks really overwhelming, but it's not. In fact, I think I'll just go over this in lab with you. A couple of points to make. Here's the aorta coming out of the heart. It's the ascending aorta, the arch of the aorta, and the descending aorta. The descending aorta comes down here and splits. When it splits, it changes names. It becomes called the common iliac. That's the right common iliac and the left common iliac. And then the iliacs split again, and they're called the internal iliac right here, and the external iliac, which is just a continuation of the big blood vessel. When it goes underneath the inguinal ligament, which is your groin ligament right here, it changes names again. It's now called the common femoral artery right here, next to your femur, obviously. And then it splits into the external, the superficial femoral artery, this one here, and the deep femoral artery, which carries blood to the thigh here. The superficial femoral artery, SFA, just carries blood straight on down. It's going to split again at your knee and nourish your whole foot. As the arch of the aorta, well, let's finish up here. There's several big branches of your aorta down here in your belly, and we will talk about them, but basically there are 3 arteries that are unpaired. When I say unpaired, in other words, there's not a right one and a left one, there's just a big one coming off the middle. And those 3 vessels, the first one is called the celiac trunk, which you see right here just below the diaphragm, and it supplies the spleen, the liver, the kidneys, not the kidneys, the stomach, and the pancreas and so forth. The next one is called the superior mesenteric